Yeah, you mentioned a couple things there that kind of stuck out with me. Related also to some stuff that you've shared here on the show in the past, but that insanity of doing the same thing, thinking it's going to turn out differently because of distorted thoughts, but really trying to do different things because even when you're in that lifestyle and you're in that addiction, you know that you probably shouldn't be there, and you try to do things to get out, but you're stuck in this distorted thinking that you can't get out of it. And the thing you shared with us was very interesting to me because it made a very compelling title for a book or a chapter in a book. Those are your 16 states of addiction, where you talk about moving through 16 states, physical states,
Yeah.
in an attempt to sort of break out of the addiction. But at no point was the thought being changed. So you're just doing the same. You end up falling back in the same patterns. And it really wasn't until you moved back home where you started from. I mean, sometimes I have this expression. I say, the journey of self-discovery is one of depth, not distance.
Yeah.
So when you had to go all the way around the world to come back to where you began in order to really begin your journey. But the first step of your journey, which is interesting, is to go back into the life. Which is kind of telling because you really can't. It's like a way of saying, okay, this is my real problem. My problem is not where I am, because here I am. This is where it started, and I'm back in the addiction. And the thing and you're recognizing it the whole time because you're talking about these distorted thoughts. It wasn't like you just became addicted because that was something that was good. It was driven by a growing mental illness, probably. I mean, you shared that. There was something going on, and it was pushing you in a certain direction. You were already in therapy or ostensibly seeing a therapist. And then you start doing this thing, and a lot of people end up in addiction because of some underlying mental illness. And it's really, really tough to beat the addiction. If you're drawn in that way, it's tough to beat that addiction without co-managing the mental illness. And so, like I said, you talk about going back in for a couple of years, and then making that commitment to get out. But at that point, you got out, you still weren't quite addressing the mental illness out of the way. So, but I do know you now, and now we're a few more years removed from that. It was 2006, then to 2008 or 9, and then now we're 2014. But I know that for the last year or so, a year and a half or so, you've really been working the addiction and the mental illness together. So, can you talk a little bit about that journey from now that your relapse is over? You said, okay, I'm going to go buy the book. I'm not going to use it as a guideline. I'm going to use it as a law. And at that point in the story, at least the way I'm hearing it, you hadn't quite finished committing to address the mental illness part. So can you tell us about how that went then, that little time period, and maybe how your mental illness played into it, and then what ended up happening to get you to where you are today, which I see a man across the way from me who is working like the demon to to battle addiction, to battle mental health, and to build a future. That's the thing. A lot of this stuff is not just about staying sane in the moment and not gambling today, but it's actually living your life. It's actually getting out and doing something, with your life. It's about living. It's not about just being sober, clean, or stable. Those are all great things, but the real fulfillment of life, the real joy of life, is actually doing something and finding something that you love to do, and then doing it. It's like, wow, this is what not only do I love doing it, it's I feel like it's a purpose directed to me from the universe. So you actually had to make a long journey. I mean, it's already been a long journey, and now you're out of your addiction. You've done a little 2-year relapse. Your life is a shambles, I would imagine at this point. Your relationship is shattered. I mean, you're committed to, like, I've got to do this. How do you get from that point to realizing that you have to take your mental illness seriously, to actually getting to find it? I mean, there's a couple of chapters there that I think are really exciting, and those of you who are listening have got to be thinking, how did he do it too? You got to be like me. How did you get here, Shane? Tell us. Help us.
Well, for the better part of 5 years, it's like I didn't start living. You all right?
Lord, faster. I'm doing the mic things. I turn the mic off, it doesn't go off. So I turn it off again, and it just turns it on again. I'm like, stop, man.
For those who are wondering, the internet is significantly slow, and because of the fire that we had, so when we hit a button, it takes a little bit longer than what we expect, and so when we turn off one mic, we turn on the other, and la 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 la. Anyways, 5 years. 5 years later, in recovery, it allowed me to be able to do what it is that I do now. If I didn't have that, I wouldn't even have a chance to do what it is that I do now. I learned after, I was really lucky. Just like in any other program, finding a sponsor is the thing to do. Is to find somebody who's been in that hole before you and able to show you the way out, as opposed to me digging deeper and faster, like we've talked about. And his name was Dickie, and he was a great friend of mine, and he was a little bit older than me, and he was very opposite of me. He really was. He liked the Red Sox, but he wasn't really big into sports. He was more into cards. I really wasn't that big into cards in the beginning, but I became bigger into cards. But I was more of a sports guy, and things just started happening in my recovery. I remember my first day was 2/17/07, and I remember living 4 days in frigid weather in the car. And people from the room, they gave me some money in order to be able to get a room on one day. Some days I had to stay in the car, and they gave me blankets and stuff. So I was really fortunate to have the people that were in the room with me. And one day, I happened to be in a motel room. I was, and I didn't have a phone because I couldn't afford a phone. But there was for the motel room, there was a payphone that was outside. And next thing I know, I'm watching TV and not even paying attention. The manager knocks on my door and says, "You have a phone call." And I said, that's impossible. Nobody really knows where I'm at, So anyway, so I'm like, oh, it's probably somebody else was in the room before I was, and he thinks it's me. So I go into this payphone. I'm like, hello, and it says, you might be looking for the guy who was here before. And it turns out to be Dickie, right? And he invited me over for dinner, and so he invites me for dinner, and I'm like, how the heck did you know where I was? And he said, somebody told me the number. And I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. And I just went along with it. And it was this relationship that I had with my sponsor that really separated me from myself, from my addiction. And I spent many nights, dinners and lunches and stuff like that. And we very rarely did we talk about step work and stuff. Sometimes we did, but I mean, often it was just about, how things are going and stuff. And he was able to look at me and not see that I was dangerous and that I was sick, because I was sick as he was. And so he was very non-judgmental. And it helped me a great deal. I finally said, you know what, I can do anything that I want in this program. I can do anything that I want aside from gambling. So I decided to jump out of an airplane. It's like, and it was a fun time and everything, but looking back on it, it was probably my mental illness that was part of the decision. But anyways, so I got 5 years of recovery into me, and things are really going well and everything. But we haven't mentioned, it's like I mentioned that I did death threat notices to myself. Well, I also committed myself to suicide quite often, and I thought that all my problems were addiction related. because that's what everybody told me. You know, it's like, well, if he's a great guy, but he's an addict. You know, so I thought it was all addiction related. Well, here it is. I'm 5 years down the road, and I'm still trying to kill myself, and thinking about, when I'm driving on I-88, and for those of you who are from New York would know, I-88 is kind of like a rocky road. It's windy, it's twisted, it's got potholes all over the place, and there are many places where you can just turn the steering wheel, and you can go off the road, and people won't know that you're gone for a good while. And I remember, even in the best of times, thinking that that was okay. That was an okay thought. So, anyways, I decided that things were really going in well. I was really producing the way that I wanted to. I was being successful where I wanted to, which was work. I started a consulting business, in regards to medical billing. I had a nice contract, and everything was going well and everything. And, but then all of a sudden things weren't going so well. And now looking back on it, it had to do with my mental illness, and that was my codependency. And for those who don't know what codependency is, I didn't know what codependency was until recently. Because I said, well, I can live independently, so I can't be codependent, but that's so wrong. I live my life through the expectations and through the acknowledgments of others. And it was a way I would attach myself greatly to things, as to where I would try to fix people. I would try to fix people's situations, and I would try to make things work for everybody else. And in the meantime, I'm the sickest of them all. So I ended up coming to a point as to where I went to commit suicide, and by carbon monoxide, and it did a job on me. It did a job on me. It kind of put me into a different kind of place. I've done suicide attempts in the past, but for whatever reason, I was resilient, and I had a lot of resolve, and I was able to move on from it. At the time, that's the way I thought. I don't think that anymore. But anyways, I went to a hospital, and I spent for the better part of 3 months in that hospital, learning, that I wasn't all too well. And I got out of there, and a year later, I was struggling. I actually was having a terrible time, money-wise, with disability and so forth. It's not an easy thing to be considered disabled. So there, I had no money coming in. I had nothing. I had my car. I had a brand new car that I was making payments on. I was having problems with my landlord. I was having problems with my relationships and everything. And I turned to what I know best, and that's to gamble at the time. And so I gambled all my money away, and that was just the last thing, and it kind of like set it off. And then unfortunately, a great friend of mine passed away tragically, and it kind of like set me to the point as to where I did another attempt. And what was happening throughout this whole time in going to the hospital and everything, everybody was giving me things to do. Everybody was telling me what to think, how to do it, how, what we suggest and everything like that. And I was being compliant. I was going to every therapy class. I was going to every group, and I'm very good in groups, especially being codependent. I'm very good in groups because I can fix anybody. I just can't work on me, So I'm in groups. I'm great. And so I sat there and I was, doing everything that everybody was saying, but I was feeling the same way that I was feeling, and that was the worst. and so I did another attempt, and I ended up spending another good while into the hospital. And you know the story. It's in my book that I'm currently writing, Strength from My Struggles Within, and the first chapter starts with this scene that I recall vividly, and it was I was called into the room to be assessed by the doctors, and there's always a routine where you sit down and they ask you these questions, and this isn't my first time in the Not Okay Corral, So I was like, yeah, okay, all right. And I'm trying to think, how am I going to figure this out? How am I going to work this out? Because I'm the only one who can do it for myself. And, and I'm thinking, and they're kind of losing my attention and everything. And all of a sudden, I hear, well, have you ever thought of electroshock therapy? And, if it was a movie, you would hear that eerie music that would all of a sudden be there, and the actor would simply, and this is what I did, is I didn't move, and then all of a sudden, my eyes looked up like they were drawn by a prompt, and basically, I said, let's do it. And because I was ready to go. And kind of took them back. They didn't know. It was like, wait a minute, that wasn't the answer. That wasn't the question that we asked, and they didn't know if I was sicker than what they thought, or if I, because I presented well, I functioned well, I was compliant, I was polite and everything in that sense. So they figured, this guy's for real. And finally, to make a long story longer, went to a therapy group, a therapy outpatient clinic, and very intensive. And then all of a sudden, it was just different than what other people do, in different places. Because I've been in numerous hospitals. I've been in 8 hospitals, and 8 hospital stays. I've been in different groups and everything like that. And this one was just different, as to where they were talking about things that I needed to hear, like PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. I never went to the war. You know what I mean? I've had, and so I never thought that I had PTSD. Well, people have even told me that I had PTSD. It's like when I took exams and stuff like this that they gave me and stuff, and they said, PTSD, and I said, no, it's like, but they mentioned it being sexually at the time, and I said, no, that wasn't me, and I lied. Because when I was in the homeless shelter, I was taken advantage of. And I just thought, why do I want to remember something that I want to forget anyways and move on from? So anyways, it wasn't about let's go through what it is that you went through. It was about, here's the symptoms of this illness that you have and how it affects your life. And I started hearing things, and I started hearing, like having nightmares. I used to have nightmares all the time. It's like, and when I say nightmares, I mean paralyzed. I was literally paralyzed to where I would be underneath a blanket, and the blanket would be so tight I couldn't get out, and I could not scream. Or I would be on a circus wheel or a swing or something like that, and it would just keep going, even though that I wanted it to stop, and it never would. And it came to find out, whether I liked it or not, I had PTSD. And I don't know. There's numerous ways that I could have had PTSD, from when I was very young to when my latest attempt. But it doesn't matter. The more I learn about it, it doesn't matter when I got it. The bottom line is I got it, and I realized why I was so tired, because my amygdala, part of your brain, is wide open at all times, and Wayne often laughs at me because I can hear a car door outside when I'm in the house, and I know exactly what car that is, and I know who's coming in. I often say that I because I hear everything. It's like I'm like a bat, nowadays. So those things, I started putting two and two together, and I says, this is starting to understand. Now I'm starting to get this. I get this. I don't want to get this, but I got it, and then I realized that it's like, then I started going back further and further, and I says, holy cow, I was pretty young when I started having these types of symptoms. And, again, I had some things happen when I was in second grade. I had a teacher that abused me. And I just thought that it was normal. I thought that because I self-loathed myself so much, it just fit the equation. You know what I mean? Because it was like, if I don't like me, then sure as hell the the teacher's not going to like me. She used to throw my desk around, pull me by my hair, mop the floor type of thing, with my knees and stuff. And I didn't even go to my parents and say, hey, this is happening. It took another student's parent to tell my mother. And then my mother came to tell me, and she says, is this happening? And I'm like, yeah. And it's like, but that's just it. It was what I knew, and that's just like PTSD. It's what I know. I just didn't know what it was. And so I started learning about things. Then I started learning about codependency, and that was a huge, huge, huge thing for me, where I was living my life through other people, through other people's achievements, through other people. If somebody, I would sit there and I would put my life to the point to where I made them a priority for me, even though they didn't. They only made me an option for them, And there was numerous relationships that I was involved with where I would help this person, or I would do all that I can for that person, and then next thing I know, for whatever reason, it didn't work out. And I took that as like I did something wrong, or that I was betrayed, or I was abandoned, or whatever the case may be. And when you have those types of feelings, it starts making a little bomb inside you, And so when I started figuring this out, in at Bright Horizons, where which is a outpatient clinic, intensive outpatient clinic, I started figuring things out. And I said, okay, I know now why I am the way that I am. I'm no happier, you know what I mean? But I figured out why I am the way I am. So I came to the point as to where things were still going wrong. It was like an avalanche. Things were just, I lost another relationship. I lost a job, and everything was just an avalanche was going on. Relationships that I was involved with were friendships and stuff. I'm trying to help them, and they're going wrong and everything. All I'm doing is helping, right? So, it's like my analogy is if I help an old lady across the street, I don't expect her to slap me in the face, But that's what was happening, and I had no idea why until I started learning about codependency. Then all of a sudden I started realizing, you know what? It was my choices of relationships that I was having. It was the people that I was having relationships with, friendships with, as to where they weren't capable of giving me what it is that I needed, but they were sure capable of taking all the help that I could give. And so that kind of dawned on me, and yes, I got an answer, but no, it wasn't that much better. And I finally came to this really desperate part of me as to where I said, you know what, maybe I'm not supposed to live, I'm not supposed to be happy the way that I want to be happy in this life. I came to that conclusion, and I said, and I'm in a group, and I'm sitting there, and I'm frustrated, I'm mad, I'm desperate, and I finally just said to myself, maybe I'm supposed to use my experiences to help another. And I didn't say this part, but when I did one of my attempts, which was back in 2012, I haven't felt my heartbeat very much. And don't get me wrong, I know that my heart's beating, obviously, but I used to feel like it was there, I used to feel that. I'm a very passionate type of person, and I hadn't felt that in a very long time. And when I came to that realization, when I said, maybe I'm supposed to use my experiences to help another, all of a sudden, my heart just went, ba-boom. That's it. It wasn't anything extravagant. The skies didn't open up. There wasn't no ray of light or nothing like that. It was just ba-boom. And but it was poignant to me. And I came to the realization that, okay, and I'm a spiritual guy, and so I'm like, okay, I'm supposed to do that. Now, how am I supposed to do that? And that's when I started writing a book, and I started putting pages together and stuff like this, and I wasn't very good at it. I was horrible, and I was very judgmental to myself, and I was like, oh, frustrating and everything. And then I just said to myself, you know what? I can't do this, but maybe I can do this. And next thing I know, I started putting together speeches. I started putting together the blueprint for a speech, and you were there, and you were my sounding board, and things started clicking, and things started coming together, and I realized it wasn't just me. It was my higher power as well, and that's where we came from, and I just decided that that's what I want to do, is I want to be able to help others, and I know my higher power is helping me.